Welcome to the LDA Podcast, a series by the Learning Disabilities Association of America. Our podcast is dedicated to exploring topics of interest to educators, individuals with learning disabilities, parents, and professionals to work towards our goal of creating a more equitable world. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the LDA Podcast. I'm here today with Santina Taglialatela, an individual with dyscalculia and a recruiting coordinator at a renewable energy company. Santina, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to be here.
We're so excited to talk to you. We really wanted to explore dyscalculia from an adult's perspective because, as we know, learning disabilities don't go away as you age. So I would love to dive into just a little bit about your experience and what it's like for you in the workplace, too. But before we get into that, I would like to give you the chance to just tell us a little bit about yourself.
So my name is Santina. I'm 35. I'm a recruiting coordinator in New York City, and I live with two very sassy cats.
We started talking, or before this conversation, we had talked about that you had a later dyscalculia diagnosis, that this diagnosis is actually fairly recent for you. So could you dive into what led you to seek this diagnosis?
Sure, yeah. So I've always struggled with math, ever since I was little, had difficulty with multiplication tables, division, and it didn't get better from there. I excelled in every single other area except for math. And yeah, so during COVID, the internet's wonderful. I was on TikTok and the algorithm showed me people who recently got their autism diagnoses. And I started noticing the symptoms. I'm like, okay, that feels like me. I feel like an alien. I don't understand people's behaviors, and just check down the list. So in 2021, I got my autism diagnosis. And as I learned more about autism, I learned that it could be comorbid with dyscalculia. So as I explored the symptoms of dyscalculia, I was like, oh my God, this sounds like me. Like I can't do math. Concepts are very hard for me. It's hard for me to read maps or take directions. And learning the analog clock was very difficult at first. So I'm like, okay, I think it's time to kind of see what's going on here, if it's actually me being bad at math or if there's something more. So I reached out to Dr. Schroeder and got my assessment. And this last spring, I was diagnosed. So yeah, very, very recent.
Well, and that can often be the case too if it's not spotted early in school. A lot of individuals do get a diagnosis later in life, which I think is important to note just because there's no age limit to being able to get a diagnosis.
I think my teachers had a perhaps clue, because they had sent my mom home some letters saying they wanted to put me in the advanced classes because I was excelling in all the other subjects. But then they also wanted to put me into the slower classes because of math. So it was very much, my mother was confused. She was not happy. I grew up in an environment that was very like, there could be nothing wrong with you. So definitely slipped through the cracks there.
That makes it, and I'm really glad that you brought up that it wasn't just multiplication tables and doing math inside a classroom, which I think a lot of people associate with dyscalculia, that it's a little bit more than that, that it's reading analog clocks, that it's directions. So I am really excited to talk about that. Could you expand on maybe what are some symptoms or challenges that you face with dyscalculia that people might not automatically think of?
So in my day-to-day, the two-step verification system with the SMS, they give you
Yes.
the six-digit code. I am looking at that two or three times because the numbers are switching around or I'm not reading it right the first time. I'm not going to say it's super time consuming, but it's definitely frustrating having to check back and forth when you're just like, I just want to log in to my bank account or, Facebook or whatever. Things like that. Directions, I can't tell you how many times I've gotten lost in my own neighborhood that I grew up in because, I'm very visual and maybe I took a turn and it didn't look familiar to me and I couldn't understand, east, west, north, south directions. I'm very much left, right, up the block, down the block. So if I'm ever lost, it's a whole journey just to figure out where I am and where I need to be. Yeah, and thankfully I don't run into analog clocks too much anymore now that everything's digital. So
Yes.
that problem kind of solved itself.
Yeah, that's great. Well, and I mean, the two-factor verification, that's on almost everything now. So it's just that little bit of extra time a day. But I wanted to ask you too, after your diagnosis, I know it's been fairly recent, but has some things changed for you since your diagnosis?
I think I'm still kind of figuring things out. I do give myself more grace now with myself because before it was, oh my God, like, am I stupid? Why can't I get this? And now it's like, okay, you have an actual disability. And just being able to say, like, okay, I have a disability. If I need an accommodation, I could go get an accommodation. And people are a lot more understanding of, like, okay, you actually can't do this. So it's been a more, I would say, emotional help than anything so far.
And about the workplace too, I wanted to talk a little bit about what are some of the challenges that you face as an individual with dyscalculia in the workplace? What are some things that sort of come up that you don't see your peers maybe have struggles with?
Oh, whenever I'm asked to do anything to do with metrics, um, immediate panic, immediate panic. I become irritable, I become frustrated, my heart's racing. Sometimes I'll cry, and it's like so alienating and embarrassing to go through that in the workplace. But I kind of have to take my moment and going back to what I said and give myself some grace and like just calm down and get to it because you do have to produce something in this world, right? To keep your job. Luckily, Excel has been a lifesaver. Um, I kind of think of it kind of like baking, where you're putting all the ingredients into the bowl, you put it into the oven is Excel, it does its thing, and you get a result. So I'm not like panicking as much. It's a way of like, okay, like somebody else is doing the math for me. I just need to input the pieces. So
Yeah,
that's been a really big help.
that's a good point. Well, and I wanted to ask too, are there, in addition to Excel and just kind of taking a moment to calm down in between tasks that are really difficult, what are some ways that you've learned to compensate for your challenges with dyscalculia? And this can be in the workplace or in your day-to-day life.
So I use Excel to budget for my expenses, my yearly, figuring out like, okay, what's my rent gonna look like? Yeah, very important things in New York City, or I guess everywhere, but especially in New York City where the rent is so high. Um, I also use Google Maps. That has been a lifesaver. I used to be embarrassed. Like, I didn't want anybody knowing that I was Googling how to get from point A to point B as a native New Yorker. And now I'm just like, it is what it is. I don't feel like getting lost today. So this is what we're gonna do. What else is there? Yeah, the internet has been lovely. I don't know if I would have survived this long if we didn't have technology. I love putting in equations into Google. Like decimals are really hard for me.
Oh,
So if I, whether I'm home or at work, I'll be like, okay, what is 0.087 times 0.009, whatever the case is, and Google will just spit it out, and I love that for me. And the internet's great because there's all these websites who have calculators specifically for this one thing. So it could be for percentages like, oh, what's the increase by X amount? And it's so accessible and so easy to use that it's really been life-changing.
absolutely. Do you have any advice for fellow individuals with learning disabilities in the workplace? I know your diagnosis is still fairly new. You said you're figuring things out, but it seems like you're getting a good handle on already just compensating for the things that challenge you. So, do you have any advice?
Don't be afraid to use technology. It's there for a reason. And, as I said before, I'm kind of going through this myself, giving yourself grace. And I also think, especially for people who are newly diagnosed, grieve. You go through this process of you have all these flashbacks of every mistake that you've ever made with math, being embarrassed, and you kind of, you have a sense of sadness over what could have been if there was an earlier intervention, if you had gotten help. Yeah, and just wondering what could have been. And
Absolutely.
that's okay. Just grieve. It's okay. I know it feels weird at first because you're kind of grieving over a concept. Um, but really, like you're grieving your past self and the possibilities. So just let that happen. Let that happen. The other thing too with grieving is that you think upon the cultural aspects of it as well. I grew up with first generation Americans in an immigrant neighborhood, and you couldn't have anything wrong with you, right? Like life was hard enough. Like you were just trying to get by. You could not have a kid who was different from the other children, right? Because you're trying to fit in, you're not trying to bring attention to yourself. And I think a lot of people who come from an immigrant community or, are first generation themselves would identify with that. I think there's a lot more pressure on us to perform and perform well and perform neurotypically than there would be if, that wasn't the case.
Such great advice.
Thank you.
So yeah, I really appreciate that. What is something that you wish more people understood about dyscalculia?
Oh, we are not lazy. Like, I'm not purposely being inefficient or ineffective. I literally can't do what you're asking me to do. Believe me, like, if I could chop off and sell my toes, like, I totally would just to have the ability to do math. Like, I need math more than I need my toes. Like, it's so, like, it's so emotional and it's so frustrating at times. And, you know, just it's not on purpose. So yeah.
Yeah, and it's such a shame that that laziness myth is still pervasive. You think with there's so much more knowledge than we had 10 years ago, and that's still just a pervasive myth that really harms people that have learning disabilities because it's not true. And a lot of the times, individuals with learning disabilities are actually working harder than their peers to compensate for their challenges. So you have that added frustration on top of that. So it's a real shame. And I agree entirely that I wish more people knew that.
Yeah. Oh yeah, it's exhausting. It's so exhausting.
Yeah.
And people don't realize that that aspect of that as well is just you're using so much more brain power and so much more like emotion to just power through things that are so much easier for everyone else.
Yeah. Well, could I ask how you went about self-advocacy for yourself in the workplace? How did you explain this to your coworkers that it isn't just you being lazy, it's that these things are a genuine challenge?
So I think I'm that annoying coworker who's always like, well, I'm autistic. And, now that I found out that I have dyscalculia, I'm like, yeah, no, I have this other thing too. And I'm very lucky. My coworkers are super empathetic, and it's been really easy for me. I've been incredibly lucky, and I recognize that. And I think having my boss as well, she's wonderful. Um, I think she understands more than most that, there are these things that you can't overcome through sheer force, right? So, and I've also noticed there have been times where I've posted about being autistic on LinkedIn, and my coworkers have really responded to that, which I was like, oh, this is not what I would expect because you hear all these horror stories of like people being bullied or feeling outcasted, and that just has not been my experience. So I think, going through this process, like realizing that there are people out there who understand what you're going through, or at least could be sympathetic and empathetic, um, has really been amazing. It's really changed my perspective on a lot of things.
I'm so glad that was your experience, that you have such a supportive community around you in the workplace.
Yeah.
Santina, I really want to thank you for sharing your experience with us. I think it's going to do a lot to raise understanding about dyscalculia.
Yes, thank you so much for the opportunity. I've really enjoyed being able to speak about my experience, especially with something that's so new to me.
Thank you for listening to the LDA podcast. To learn more about LDA and to get valuable resources and support, visit ldaamerica.org.